Welcome to the Eye of the Needle podcast, where we discuss healthcare innovation and explore how visionary entrepreneurs and change leaders are reshaping the future of our industry. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Eye of the Needle with Joe Arlotto. For all of those of you who I have not met yet, my name is Joe Arlotto, and I am the manager of product strategy here at Maestro Strategies and work very closely with Pam and many of our clients in delivering value and return on investment, which is going to be the topic of today's episode. And I'm joined by Pam today, and we're going to have a panel-style discussion where her and I go back and forth discussing some of the issues and problems and challenges in healthcare as it relates specifically to ROI. So to begin things off, healthcare stands at a very pivotal moment with all of the change in digital transformation, companies beginning to adopt technology to help better patient care, as well as the evolving needs of the population and the healthcare that they're receiving. We're seeing a lot of different breakthroughs, not only from the technology standpoint and things such as generative AI to assist with patient-first care models, but also innovation in rewriting some of the rules. We're seeing many policy changes as well as regulatory changes at a larger macro level. And then beneath all this excitement lies a very critical question to the success of all of this innovation that's happening. Are these investments truly driving change, or are they just inflating costs and potentially adding another layer of confusion to an already very complicated industry? So today we're going to really confront a lot of these topics and the reality of ROI within healthcare innovation specifically, and why proving that transformative value is the ultimate challenge in solving many of these issues. So today I'm joined, as mentioned already, by Pam, who spent a lot of her career solving these problems for organizations battling to innovate and bring true change. So with all of that being said, I want to start by asking Pam, how would you define ROI, and how would you define ROI specifically within healthcare?
Thanks, Joe. So historically, ROI has been a financial analysis. We've looked at values such as cost benefit ratios, net present value, internal rate of return, and a number of other analytics related to telling the CFO and others if there's going to be a financial return. But we like to define ROI, value, and ultimately the impact you're having in a much broader, more expansive sense. We like to think about the change that you desire and the scope of that change as compared to the IT and business and other investments you have to make that change successful. Often that helps you define how big is the investment going to be and how large of a scope of change are you going to go after.
Excellent. So going off of that, then, why would it be so critical within an ROI setting to measure successful change initiatives, not only just in healthcare, but in most industries?
Well, it's not just whether or not a budget will be to set a budget or to get approval for an expenditure. There's so many reasons that ROI is important. One is to get stakeholder buy-in. Once they understand the financial returns as well as potential clinical or business outcomes or results compared to what investments they're going to make, that helps align your stakeholders, establish credibility, and build some trust. We've also found that for a product or solutions company, it can help differentiate that company when they're out in the market selling their product and competing in a very complicated and busy marketplace. Another reason to do an ROI analysis is to help an organization align with their strategic goals. Are they growing? Are they transforming and innovating? What are their specific objectives in terms of the impact to the bottom line, but also to their mission? And for those organizations who are wanting to truly accelerate innovation, an ROI metric or set of metrics can provide a proof of concept and then even sometimes attract funding if you need outside investors in your effort. But finally, what I find most fascinating, for some organizations, it can even be a barrier to change. they can use the ROI findings or the lack thereof to say, no, we're not going to do this change initiative right now.
So what would be an example, and if you could make this tangible, a real world example of this definition and all those facets that you just touched on?
So I think one of the one that to me is very comprehensive, that gives a real practical example, is the hospital at home initiative, which basically moves patients from an inpatient facility to receive that exact level of acute care, but in their own home. So there are a lot of desired outcomes. There are clinical goals you hope to achieve. You want to reduce infection, which you can often acquire in a facility. You want to have maybe a higher or quicker recovery time, and then improve satisfaction of the patient and their family. There's also capacity implications when you look at so many organizations, so many acute care facilities are full today. They don't have enough beds. So shifting some of their less intense patients to their home really helps with that. We're also seeing cost savings. It's obviously cheaper and less expensive to provide care in someone's home than in a hospital. And then finally, a lot of organizations see that it's becoming part of their brand. Health systems are saying, we will attract patients and consumers to our brand, to our facilities, if they think we're using some of the most innovative care models out there, and it boosts their competitive advantage. So those are kind of the level of change or the scope of change. Back to that investment side of the house, you have to weigh that level of change that you're going to accomplish with a hospital at home model to the investments that you're having to make. And there are a number. It's not just IT, which would be like remote patient monitoring, so you can track the patient on an ongoing basis in their home. You've also got to pull those results from the RPM system into your EHRs. You've got to make the EHRs available to your home-based care professionals. You've got to train the staff on the new workflows needed and the new processes needed. Sometimes you have to contract with home care providers or agencies to help you provide that work. Plus, there are also a number of logistical costs, whether you're putting in devices in the home, setting up infrastructure in the home, getting medicines and other items to the patients in their homes. All of those are cost of that investment. So you compare the change, the results of that change, with what it's going to take to make it successful. Sometimes we find, like if you do a trial, it may look really good in that pilot or trial, but not be scalable, and vice versa. It might be greatly scalable and look good, but the trial or the pilot is very expensive. And we see that sometimes with hospital at home models because it's hard to implement just a few. It's much easier to deploy the benefits and the cost to a broader array of patients.
Excellent. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into this hospital at home example to illustrate a larger point around one of the things that we've already established in this episode is kind of that combination and that continual growth of change and innovation with measuring against an ROI. But with many of these things, particularly in healthcare and in the world that we live in, and as digital transformation and technical adoption becomes a larger part of our patient care, we're in uncharted waters, right? And, fast forward, or excuse me, rewind a few years ago back to COVID when hospital at home became a huge necessity, but it wasn't as commonplace as it is today. You have these organizations and health systems that are having to scramble to provide these new innovative forms of care. How would you measure ROI on something that's never been done before, on these truly innovative first time use cases, and saying, hey, we know that there's a need here. We know that there's sick patients who can't come into the hospital or don't have the priority. How do we truly gauge that this is about to be a very successful or complete failure of something that we're going to go for and try to push the envelope on?
Well, that's amazing that you asked me that question, because I actually had a client tell me or their hospital at home model. Oh, we can't measure it. We've never done it before, so we don't even know how to start. But in my opinion, and based on all the books that we've written and all the classes we've given and all the clients we've supported in this area, that's the very time you want to measure. Now, certainly it may not be perfect, but you can estimate ranges. Okay, we believe the value or return will be between here and here, like the low to high, or even an estimate, a midpoint, or the cost will be X, Y, and Z. And interestingly, sometimes you just set a goal. You go, okay, we know what the returns are inside a facility, and we know what the cost to provide that care in the facility would be. So what are the improvements we want to make? We might say we only want a 10% improvement on the first run of it. Well, that sets you a target and a goal. So you can do your planning. It gives you a planning tool. So it's less about coming up with a perfect number that's going to make everybody happy and more about giving you a tool to learn. And that's what we see ROI and value analysis often doing is you iterate, you learn, you do it over and over and over. And every time you do it, you get a little bit better and a little more accurate, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So having this large goal and then knowing that that goal might move. It's not a necessarily line in the sand, but knowing that, hey, this is where we're trying to get, and knowing and aligning the team that, hey, that target that we're moving toward is probably going to move once we start uncovering information and moving in that direction.
And Joe, that's a really important point because often, probably one of the biggest mistakes, and I know you and I are going to discuss mistakes in more detail in a few minutes, but one of the biggest mistakes we see people doing is they do it a one-time build a business case so they can get it in the budget or get the approved purchase. And then they never do any follow-up. They never do a postmortem. They never look to see, is it going as we planned? Did we get what the vendor promised? And we view it as an ongoing process, not a one and done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So almost that you're setting the goal and you're aligning the team at the beginning, but then you're also taking the time, that iterative process to look and say, hey, are we hitting our goals? If not, what, let's have these conversations, let's have the discussion, let's reset our priorities, reset. That
And
way
refine them.
everybody's, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely. So if you were to sit a business leader down who is working to bring a new idea to market or working within a larger organization to, an entrepreneurial venture to bring something to that product offering, and they're really trying to convince either their higher ups or their boards or their boss, whoever it might be, that, hey, this ROI is worthwhile. What advice would you give them? Maybe one or two pieces that, hey, this is kind of what I would do if I was in your shoes.
Well, you've definitely got to involve them. And another mistake we see is that people will do a one size fits all ROI. And the reality is, you almost have to say, okay, who are all the key stakeholders? What does this group care about? What does this group care about? What does this group? And maybe the analyses end up with something very different. We'll also talk a little bit broader in this episode about creating a complete value story. And that value story is part of what it's going to take to convince them. And we'll get into that more in a few minutes.
Excellent. So moving inward to a little bit more of the digital organization, right? You've talked about it in your previous episodes, the healthcare 1.0 to 4.0, the transition from the traditional brick and mortar to a different version of healthcare and that providing of healthcare. Just starting at a very macro level, how will this digital organization, as you've discussed, be different from that traditional brick and mortar going in to see a doctor version of healthcare?
So, as we all know, the traditional brick and mortar healthcare system is very fragmented. It's very siloed. Decisions are made in a fairly bureaucratic and hierarchical manner. And so we implemented a lot of our IT and even some of our digital health solutions according to that structure. But that is fairly an incremental change, even though even if you're implementing an EHR for a whole doctor's practice, it's it might seem revolutionary at the time, but ultimately it's a very discrete IT implementation in an existing organization. The thing that's different about digital care and connected organizations and this new ecosystem that we're building in 4.0 is that all of the technologies, whether it's an EHR, a CRM, an ERP, and I know that's the alphabet soup, but whether you're dealing with clinical data, customer data, or supply chain data, all of that information is kind of historically in those siloed systems. In the future, it's going to be very integrated. It's going to not just integrate what's going on within an enterprise, but it's going to be very data driven across this whole ecosystem. And we'll be designing new ways of working. So we're not just going to rethink the way you deploy a clinical system or rethink the way you do revenue cycle management. We're going to rethink the entire way care is delivered, our clinicians work together, and not only how the care delivery organizations work, but how they work with the community organizations. So your food banks, your housing centers, the way you move your population around and transport them. So we're going to be looking at how do we prevent disease? How do we personalize the care of individuals? So it's going to be a very, very different world in the next 5 years than it's been in the past. And we also need to think a little bit about how we measure ROI and value in that future. And it's going to be different than the way it's been historically.
Absolutely. We're going to have to redefine what it means to be successful in that new healthcare setup. So if you were to take those were all, very macro, right? And if you were to take each one and put yourself in the patient's shoes and put yourself in a care provider's shoes, a doctor, a nurse, whoever it might be, the person actually taking care of the patient, what would you say would be the biggest change that you would see feet on the ground in the next 5 years from each of those perspectives?
Well, I think for all of them, they're going to be designed around the consumer or the patient. In the past, we designed the way we worked around the hospital or the doctor's office or the doctor, or the patient had to come to us. But in the future, everything will be designed and very patient centric. We're going to personalize care using artificial intelligence, virtual care, even digital twins on the specific needs of those individual patients. All of those siloed systems of the past will be, as I mentioned earlier, integrated, and the data will be shared across those organizations and across multiple interoperable platforms. But I think probably one of the most exciting things from the perspective of all of those stakeholders is most of our data in the past has been looked at historically. And we'd have a static scorecard that we would use. It might have only been produced once a quarter or once a week or once a day, but it was pretty much a static scorecard giving us results or outcomes or even ROI looking backward. In the future, we're going to have real-time continuous data flowing so that we'll know at any minute where a patient's blood pressure is or where their glucose levels are. So it won't be just monitoring their blood pressure or their diabetes once a month when they go see their doc, or once a quarter when they go see their doc, or once a year. It'll be constant and continuous. And so we will be able to predict what's going to happen and prevent bad outcomes from happening before they ever happen. So that's just this huge pivot from the way we've done things historically.
Yeah.
So we're going to see that, and that's going to impact the workforce. It's going to impact our operating models, our care delivery models. And honestly, I believe it's going to completely we're going to have a revolution in healthcare culture, because we're going to be collaborating and working in a very new and different way than we have historically.
So you started to mention a little bit about this real-time data, being able to, whether it's through a wearable device or certain software programs, whatever it might be, there's going to be a lot more constant feedback and real-time feedback for patient care perspective. Talk a little bit about also this transition from using analytics just to, review decisions and to the evolution of prescriptive analytics and how that might enhance patient care.
Well, it's going to drive everything. So rather than a doctor having to, and we've all been in the doctor's office and we hear them outside our door, and you can tell they're going through the paper. They're reviewing our chart, or they're looking at their computer before they come in. AI will review all of that. Will review all of the data for a patient and all the sites they've been seeing over the last year or two, possibly even some of their own wearables. And it will say, okay, looking at this guy's numbers, it is very possible in 6 months to a year, he's going to have an event. So we'll be able to proactively do things in a preventative fashion so that the chronic or even emergent episode never does happen. So what we're really going to start to do, and I really believe this is going to trickle down to the way we measure ROI, the way we look at outcomes, is we're going to look at bigger results and a broader impact. And so rather than just solving old problems that we've all had in this industry for years and years and years, we're going to begin to transform the way we work in unprecedented ways. We're going to create new value, and that could be across multiple dimensions. That could be financial, operational, clinical, societal, even, or even environmental. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have this data coming to us in a real-time, continuous flow, so that we'll be able to predict those results, predict that impact, value, and ROI. And we're going to look not just at what's happening within an enterprise or a hospital or a practice. We're going to able to look across partnerships and across the entire community, possibly regions of the country, nation, or even globally, on how we address certain conditions and address disease as we know it. One of the things that I really think we're going to be able to translate to the workforce is we're going to be able to personalize the ROI and that impact for them as a worker. So they'll know, well, if I do these things, it will have this impact. It's not going to be just, going about your day in and day out work life the same way. We're going to be able to redesign work almost in a very fluid way. So those are some of the things I think will happen because of having better data, having AI that's going to do some of the work for us, and also really having true personalized medicine as opposed to what we've done in the past.
Got it. So changing gears a little bit here, still staying within the realm of ROI, right? We understand that it's important that a company who's trying to sell into the healthcare marketplace really understand their ROI, what value they're going to be bringing to their potential clients and customers. But who else in the stakeholder continuum should understand ROI and be able to communicate it?
That is a great question. And for years, so many executives would go, we don't need to prove the ROI. We just have to do these things, either because the regulations are expecting us to, or if we want to get our meaningful use dollars, we have to implement these EHRs. But what I really believe, and I've really seen this happen in the past few years with CMIOs and my work with chief health information officers, is they're really at the pivot point of being able to take a lot of these digital health tools, these analytics tools, to really begin to change the way care is delivered. And often they're saying, how do I prove the value of this? And for many clinicians, it's more qualitative than quantitative. So they want to say, how can I tell the story in a new and different way? But I see this with CEOs, CFOs, of course, always care about it. Chief marketing officers want to be able to tell those stories. And so what I believe the next emphasis for our industry won't be just on return on investment analysis, because honestly, if every vendor who said they had done an ROI study on their impact on readmissions actually did what they promised, we wouldn't have a readmissions problem. But I think we need to tell a broader value story. And I kind of call that the next generation ROI. It's truly telling a value story and helping make it matter.
So you've mentioned this value story before. For those of us who aren't aware, can you define what a value story is and the importance that it has in the ability to get to the places you're trying to go in your professional career?
Sure. So we know financial and outcome measures have mattered a lot in, say, let's just say the last 10 plus years. In the future, we've also got to add an emotional and strategic import to the way we're delivering why invest in this, or why should we do this change initiative in the first place. And so what bringing that emotional and strategic story to the fold will do is it links the metrics to a narrative, and it helps persuade others. It will help persuade decision makers across the gamut to support the change, not always just spending the money, but the change, because there's a lot to these efforts that are much bigger than just writing a check or putting it in a budget. It can be can impact the culture. It can be stressful. It can be distracting. So there are a lot of reasons beyond just the numbers or just the basic metrics that you need to incorporate into your value story.
So it almost gets that buy-in from everybody else within the organization. It helps provide more of the why you're asking for what you're asking for, whereas the ROI analysis gives you the what. This is going to be the why it's a good idea for us to pursue these things.
Yes.
So if
Yeah.
you were to break that down in a little more detail for us, what would you say would be the key components of a strong value story?
So if you have a problem or a challenge that you're trying to solve, you need to clearly define the pain points. Or if you're trying to create new value, what are the opportunities that this change and the scope of change you want to accomplish will address? So start with that problem, that challenge, or that opportunity. Then you need to break down what is the solution that you're bringing forward. Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a broad program or project that's going to address that problem, challenge, or opportunity? Then really tying the specific data and metrics, including the measurable ROI, the specific clinical outcomes, operational efficiencies, customer satisfactions, broader societal impact, community impact, whatever the results will be, putting that into the story, and then linking that to the broader strategic goals of those stakeholders that are your audience. So if it's an entire community, you need to touch all the stakeholders in that community. If it's an enterprise, who are the key decision makers within that enterprise? If it's a customer, who are the decision makers within that customer? And then something a lot of people forget is a call to action. So this is what the change will do, and what is your role in it, and what do you need to do to accomplish that change? And it's not just, sign a check. It's what has to happen to make this successful.
Right. Because it's you could have an entire meeting and say all these great things, but if there's no what am I supposed to do with this or what is my responsibility in this change, then it's going to be hard to have any sort of buy-in or any sort of momentum coming out of that. So just as a recap, we have you want to clearly define what that problem or challenge is for everybody that you're speaking with. You want to already have thought of the solution. I think a lot of times people they know what the problem is, they love to complain about the problem, but then they get into the meeting and they haven't given any thought to the solution, right? They can just clearly articulate what the issue is. So definitely have some solutions ready. And I think another thing as well that I often see in the product world is people trying to bring a solution to the table of this problem that they've thought about and thought about and thought about, but they haven't necessarily engaged the customer or talked with coworkers or gotten all of the stakeholders insight so that they're really solving the wrong problem or they aren't working on the best solution. So I think it's really important to have a solution in mind, but also be open to knowing that, hey, I want your help in coming up with an even better solution. I think that's another really good way to share a very strong value story that'll get other people wanting to help you out. The third piece is that evidence. Hey, why is this the problem that we need to focus on, and what is the outcome and the ROI that's going to lead to it? And then the last two is the broader impact. How does this affect me, right? How is what Pam's telling me in this meeting affect my day to day, and why should I care? And then finally, that call to action. Here's what I need from you.
Right. Right.
So going, continuing in that line so that we really kind of cover the whole value story piece, what would you say are some of the typical mistakes that you've seen with leaders when they're trying to tell a successful value story?
And there are a number. I'll try to keep my list relatively short, but let me share with you the ones I see most frequently. The number one, particularly in the digital health world or the healthcare information technology world, is they focus on the technology or the product, not the results. So often people really don't care about the tech itself. They just want to know what will be that overall change, how will it solve my problem, how will it create new opportunity, et cetera, not the tech itself or the features or functionality. Another thing I see happen quite frequently is they don't peel the onion away enough. They focus on fairly high level, generic, or irrelevant metrics. They're not really doing what you just said, connecting to the pain points that the audience has, or even tailoring it to the unique organizational context. Because people think you've seen one health system, you've seen one health system, you've seen one practice, you've seen one lab, you've seen one lab, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, every organization has unique competencies, capabilities that need to be considered as part of that value story.
And I have
Another,
to imagine if you don't peel that onion back enough, it's going to come across like you don't really know what you're talking about.
or even care enough, honestly.
Yeah.
And another thing, and we're terrible consultants in particular, but a lot of the healthcare industry overloads every conversation with so much jargon, and they throw the wrong kind of data out or the buzzwords, and they just need to tell a simple story. Sometimes they'll ignore the emotional side of that value story. They don't think about the fears or the values. They're not creating anecdotes or testimonials or even good narratives for that matter. And that ties to some of those fears. What are the risks and the uncertainties? What are those potential unintended consequences that could happen when you're going through this level of change? Another mistake that happens quite frequently is we overpromise and underdeliver. I mean, I guess that's been the story since time began, but I'd a lot rather see a smaller change with a smaller investment that's successful than trying to boil the ocean and then failing because we didn't have all the components considered well. And so that ties to really thinking through, once the change is adopted and deployed, what will happen afterwards? How do you ensure that you go from your initial deployment to full scalability. All of those things really are quite frequent mistakes that organizations make when they're trying to say, oh yeah, we have an ROI or there's value, without considering and building that into your whole value story.
Understood. So now I feel like we've really covered a lot of a successful value story, how to tell it, maybe some of the mistakes to avoid. And I want to transition now to giving the audience a little bit more around healthcare specifically and the investments that are being made. So based on your years of working with different clients, what you're seeing now, what you're reading about, what are the types of investments that health systems are prioritizing today, and what are you, if you were to kind of force rank them, what would you say would be the number one spot, and vice versa down the list?
Okay, well, that's really a great question. So I'm gonna do kind of a broad sweep on this. That doesn't mean I've covered everything, but probably the one they're kind of still in that risk aversion mode. So cybersecurity, they're spending a lot of money on infrastructure and security. Probably the most dollars are going to that now because they're trying to avoid that risk. We also are still seeing a lot of organizations spending money on optimizing their EHR. So, deploying all the components of it, making sure that they've designed the workflows. None of those are very exciting and innovative. We about a third of health systems and other buyers in the industry are beginning to look at digital care and innovation. So we do see that happening, and that's everything from digital front door initiatives to patient engagement platforms to virtual health beyond telehealth, but full on virtual first care. So those are probably the top three. People are talking a lot about AI, machine learning, and I'd say that still that third of innovators are exploring that, deploying that, working with AI, and that could be anything from workflow automation and intelligent automation, as they call it, to clinical decision support, and then helping streamline administrative operations. Revenue cycle management, believe it or not, still wins the day. If you have something that's in that way of helping collect money better, build better, manage revenue more effectively, about 70% of health systems are spending money in those areas. So those are the big ones. There are other areas as well, but those are what I'm really seeing the ROI and the interest being around today.
What about something that maybe isn't a big money ticket, right? I mean, we've been talking about EHR modernization for a decade now, if
Right.
not longer, right? We've been
Right.
talking about and focusing on, as technology adoption goes up, so does the focus on security infrastructure and having a secure network and, trying to avoid the changed healthcare situations of the world. But what would you say is one of these more innovative, exciting topics or areas that is getting a little bit of traction that maybe the leading health systems are taking a gamble on and saying, hey, this might pay off, this might really elevate a certain facet of either our patient care or operational efficiency or whatever it might be?
I think it has to do with workforce. We have solved our workforce dilemmas the same way for decades. Raise salaries, recruit harder, kind of, the revolving door, particularly among clinicians. And the reality is, we know that we have a whole generation retiring. We have a number of newly minted workforce, clinicians, both nurses and physicians and other care extenders They get into it and they're like, wow, this is harder, more complex. And they struggle a little bit, and everybody in between. It's obviously a multi-generational thing, but we can't afford to throw the staffing agencies at it like we've done in the past, or we've got to get a little more creative. And so I'm seeing some really interesting approaches toward using AI to take the routine out of work. And in the past, we used a lot of our people to be the glue between the big enterprise systems. So you read all the reports out of one system, the person would analyze it, then they'd go in and put other information into another system. A lot of the exciting initiatives are not huge enterprise systems or huge platforms, but they're very targeted tools that will go in and take that work off of an individual, so that those that are there are used to the top of their license, can focus on critical thinking and used to solve really big problems. And a lot of the routine work are being shuttled to these automated systems like chatbots or other tools. So we're getting really creative there and looking at how do we make that journey through that health system easier for patients to navigate, more effective, frictionless, and that helps both the workforce as well as the consumers and patients.
Absolutely. Taking these point solutions for the more mundane tasks and kind of increasing some of the efficiency there. Excellent. So we just talked a little bit about, these top topics of where's the investment going, what are health systems prioritizing today. Now, take us, behind closed doors here with these stakeholders, right? Within these health systems, who is usually the one deciding to pursue an investment, who's kind of the final I agree to this, and then a plan gets moved into motion? And what would you say what's their mindset, right? If whether you're an employee working within their organization or you're somebody in the business development sales world that wants to know kind of the way these people are thinking, what would you say is kind of the way they decide and go about making these decisions?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. First, let's talk about some general mindsets that we're seeing out there across many organizations. And then I want to narrow it down to specific roles and responsibilities. So, kind of some of these general patterns that we see is, what is their risk tolerance? I've mentioned in previous episodes that 40% of health systems today are in negative margin world, and they've not recovered financially. So that means only 60% are in positive margins, and of those, we're looking at 2 to 3% at the most.
Barely.
Yeah, barely at the most. So financially stable organizations may view investments in these tools as opportunities, but I can guarantee you the resource constrained systems use ROI as a protective measure. And so whether you're an executive within one of these organizations, or you're a solution company or services firm trying to sell into one of these, or even a community partner, you really need to understand what is their level of tolerance for risk. Another mindset pattern is, what are they seeking? Are they looking for an immediate, short-term, got to have it now return on their expenditure or their investment? Or are they okay with more of a long-term ROI? And the way you tell is, particularly some of those resource-constrained organizations, you may see their leaders are really in short-term survival mode, and they're going to want immediate turnaround. They're going to want to see high impact right away, and they will reject, even if it's a huge ROI, they're going to reject it if it's got a delayed timeline or long-term path on it. On the other hand, organizations that have stability, who see these as opportunities, may be willing to invest for and prioritize even those long-term benefits and results. So we mentioned risk tolerance. We said short-term versus long-term ROI. And then finally, what is their culture of innovation? We're seeing more and more organizations today have a little innovation, or a big one for that matter. Some have been doing this for decades. But those with strong innovation culture, ROI is seen as one metric among many rather than a strict barrier to change. And so it's interesting. I have even been and worked with clients that had a pretty robust innovation arm, big, a number of people that work there. They're constantly looking at different solutions, but they were developing them for the market because their own health system was not innovative enough and too risk averse. So you really have to get in, look under the covers, understand those mindset patterns for specific organizations, not just assume it's a one size fits all again. But if we start drilling down to specific roles, the CFOs are always the ones that are, they have the reputation of you have to have a hard and fast and robust ROI to get something approved. But honestly, most CFOs are fairly pragmatic. They do use it as a barrier if, like I mentioned earlier, if their organization is financially strained or challenged. But they also will make sure for their own leaders that they've gone through the rigor of building out the business case, doing the analysis, getting third-party input. Is this a valid ROI? Can we truly expect it? And putting the plan together. So it's not just against someone from the outside. They'll really push it for their own leaders to make sure they're doing their work as well. So that's the CFO. CEOs are a little bit different position. They've got to keep the board happy. They've got to keep the medical staff happy. They're usually very strategic and big picture focused. And, but they're risk averse. So they want a strong ROI, and they flat out want to make sure that if we do this change initiative, we're not going to get a reputation problem or a brand problem. So they're going to, the CEO will use it, and they'll use ROI to kind of filter out, is this a strategic imperative? And why do we need this? Is it that short-term or that long-term return on the money we spend? COOs are different animals, chief operating officers, and they're very much about efficiency. They want the organization to work better. They can be pretty tactical when it comes to how many FTEs will be saved, or at least can we move them to another part of the organization. And they're often hesitant, less about the ROI numbers, but more about, is this going to disrupt our day-to-day operations? And it's got to have a pretty significant ROI if there's going to be a significant workflow or disruptive cause or impact on the day in and day out workforce. CIOs, everybody agrees they got to get the CIO, the chief digital officer, the CMIO, and others on board. And these guys usually are fairly innovation focused. However, it's very interesting. They want to make sure these systems don't create new silos. They've worked hard to build out these platforms. Many of these CIOs are in environments where they're managing over 700 plus different software applications. They've tried to rationalize and reduce duplications. So the financial ROI is important because they know they need that for other parts of the leadership team, but they're really more concerned with the long-term impact on their technical roadmap and whether or not it ties with what they're trying to accomplish from a digital future and digital roadmap. So you're bringing in a system that is not interoperable and not integrated with their primary or core vendor, they may push back, or at least need to have a little more information than just the financial ROI. We've mentioned CMIOs, but we can't leave out the rest of the clinical leadership, the chief medical officers or chief nursing officers. These guys are really patient-centric, clinical workforce focused, and they want to make sure that there are measurable improvements in clinical quality, patient safety, and overall care team and patient satisfaction. So the traditional financial ROI is less of a focus for them, but more and more of them are recognizing they got to talk that talk too. They can't just flip that over to finance and hope they'll do the analysis for them. So those are all kind of, and there are others. I mean, you got your chief population health officers, your chief patient engagement officers, your wellness officers, we got, titles galore. And I usually recommend understand at least the major decision makers and where their heads are. Whether you're an internal leader trying to drive a major change, or you're an external company that's trying to work with an organization, you may need to tell an ROI story or a value story for each one of those different stakeholders.
But at a macro, remembering where the organization's at, right?
Exactly.
Are they risk averse? Are they hemorrhaging
Perfect.
money from paying off travel nurses since COVID? Or are they in a stable, innovative, let's push the envelope place? And then I think also additionally to everything you just said and kind of thinking through the lens of each leader is knowing which leader will have the most impact with what you're offering, right? Who will feel the pain point the most without your solution, or whose life will become that much easier because you brought this solution to their organization or whoever it might be.
And who's your champion, right?
Exactly. Because you need that executive buy-in if you're going to have any type of success. So moving into, we're running up on almost end of time here, but I have two more questions for you. And the first is, if you could just give some quick high level points. Now we understand the way these leaders are thinking, but how do you overcome a leader who is using that ROI as a barrier, or using it almost as you referred to it earlier, as a protective measure?
Right. And for risk averse, if they're a risk averse organization, they can put up these barriers just from the get-go. So you need to do this and almost anticipate that someone will use ROI as a barrier. So tailor that value story to the organization and to each leader's priorities. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, but financial for the CFO, clinical for the CMO, et cetera. Provide evidence, use real world data from other organizations, from your previous track record, case studies, or pilot program results. While a lot of organizations don't like doing pilots and they never seem to get out of pilot land, I like to call it pilot-itis. You can often use those to validate those results and outcomes and the potential impact if it's broader than just the enterprise. Also, we believe you can measure everything. In some of our books, we talk about intangibles, and highlighting those intangibles beyond the financial measure. Come up with ways to demonstrate. So for example, reputation, do a survey or look at results of those organizations who've done something similar and the percentage that felt it impacted their reputation in a positive way. Survey staff satisfaction, look at compliance, come up with ways to quantify what may seem like soft measures or intangibles, but incorporate those into the value story. Sometimes it helps to go out and get a third party that specializes in this to validate your work. And we've done that many times for clients who they've done the initial work, but they want somebody to say, what have we missed? What have we overestimated? How do we compare this to others? And so we'll sometimes use publicly available data to help validate what they've estimated for their clients. And then de-risk the proposal. Are there ways to take out that perceived problem that might happen as during deployment or after deployment? Can you phase it out? I mentioned pilots earlier. Can you contract in a way that's performance-based, just so you're reducing the perceived risk of the effort? And there are many others, but those are just a few to really make sure that value story hits home.
Absolutely. And I really like the idea of tailoring that value story to what's important to that specific leader, right? I mean, it's the emotional appeal might not work to the CFO that only cares about the numbers, right? But to a CEO who needs to be able to go and sell it to the whole organization, it's absolutely important. So all in all, really appreciate the time here, Pam. In summary, I want to kind of open it up to you to let us know how important you feel having a very complete, thought through, calculated value story will be in creating transformational change within the healthcare industry for years to come.
Well, we all have been focused on data, but value stories breathe life into that data. And what they do is connect those numbers with patients, with clinicians, with communities. When the stakeholders see how the solutions in real lives and align with their mission, sometimes they don't just approve the expenditure, they help champion that change. So knowing part of your change management or change leadership strategy is part of blending that into the value story. So what we're going to see in the future is it's not just going to be let's cut cost or let's improve a specific individual outcome. We're going to see a combination of financial, operational, societal, and even environmental value be part of the conversation. Healthcare is reinventing itself, and ROI is going to become real time and a predictive tool for this transformative change in the future. So, for all of us that are in the healthcare industry, we have a simple question. Are we ready to embrace this broader vision of value, one that challenges the way we've traditionally measured ROI and value, and then begin to drive innovation and redefine what success means in healthcare? Thanks, everybody. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Pam, and thank you all for joining us on this week's episode of Eye of the Needle. If you have any stories of your own of presenting ROI, whether it's success or failure within your organization or starting your own, feel free to comment it. We'd love to hear your side as well. But thank you guys so much for joining. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join the community. We'll see you next time.